Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a new series where I try to rework heroes in Overwatch. I had this idea sitting in the back burner for a while, and finally it has come to fruition. The first episode will talk about Mauga, which was voted for by my friends in my Discord server. And despite the comedic nature of the trailer I posted earlier, the video is actually a serious project. But to begin, the video will be divided into parts. First talking about the problems with the hero, then talking about the spirit of the rework, and then talking about the rework itself, formatted similarly to patch notes, but not exactly like one, mostly because it's how I write my reworks. However, because I planned this to be a full-on series and this is the first episode, the introduction will be slightly longer than usual, but if you want to go straight to the point, go to the timestamps below. But before you skip, it is important to note that I do use concrete numbers in this video, and even though I did think a lot about these numbers, you should probably still take some of them with a grain of salt. Even though Mauga did get a lot better since his dreadful launch in Season 8, like with Overrun, which, spoilers, doesn't get changed at all here, he still has some major issues. Firstly, his hitbox and model size. And even though he does need a size reduction like with Bastion and Weaver, this rework won't include that, but it is something I support regardless. Secondly is Cardiac Overdrive, and oh boy, does Cardiac have some issues. The first problem is that Mauga is very vulnerable outside of Cardiac, and even if he does use it, he's one anti-nade away from being completely shut down. It is also a very bursty ability, which can lead to inconsistent value depending on when you use it. But to be fair for the devs, with the way Cardiac is right now, it is probably for the better, but it still does not mean the ability is overall healthier for the game. However, if the stars do align for Mauga when he activates Cardiac, he feels unkillable during those 3 seconds. All of these issues also ignore the fact that it gets disproportionate value against tanks and is an overall pretty reactive ability rather than proactive. And last but not least, let's talk about his 2 chain guns. Even though they do have potential, the way they are currently implemented still feels like he's incentivized to use both guns to just shoot the tank, instead of using one gun at a time to focus on squishies, but it overall requires less changes than Cardiac. Now that I stated his problems, what does the rework even aim to do? Well, firstly, I want to discourage Mauga from using both of his guns at once as much as possible, and if he does, it should be a big commitment. Secondly, Cardiac needs to have more nuance and proactive uses. I want to keep the survivability aspect of it, but not make him completely unkillable during its duration if the stars align, and make the survivability of him in Cardiac slightly more skillful if possible. But to compensate, Mauga will have a stronger neutral, i.e. when he does not have Cardiac and or Overrun. So without further ado, let's get to the rework itself. Let's start with the Berserker passive, where it gets 2 flat buffs to make his neutral better, which are: his overhealth conversion rate is increased from 50% to 100%, which means he will get 8 overhealth per critical hit instead of 4. Additionally, the maximum amount of overhealth will be increased from 150 to 200. But before you freak out, I need you to put these changes in context with the rest of the rework, which will be mentioned soon. Now for his 2 chain guns. To make shooting both guns more expensive, his total ammo will be reduced from 300 to 200, with 250 being a possible middle point if it proves to be too harsh. But to compensate, the reload time will be reduced from 2 seconds to 1.75 seconds. Additionally, his fire rate on both guns will increase from around 18 shots per second to 25 shots per second. This will mean he will have a higher DPS overall, but more importantly, it also means his ammo drains a lot faster, especially when shooting both guns. Moreover, the damage per second of ignited enemies, which is 15 per second, will now be converted to overhealth. So for each enemy ignited, he'll get 15 overhealth per second for 4 seconds, for a total of 60 overhealth. Another small buff is that now when firing only one chain gun, there will no longer be any weapon spread. I am adding it since he already has one of the lowest spreads in the game when firing one gun, and since it will only encourage him to only shoot one gun, I think it is a change worth adding. And lastly, critical hits from his primary fire will now count double towards the 10 shots needed to ignite enemies. Even though it is easier to headshot tanks, I do think it will affect squishies even more since it is already very easy to set tanks on fire, but it is a bit tricky on squishier heroes, especially in longer ranges. This change aims to facilitate that. And now for his Cardiac Overdrive. And the first change is the complete removal of his lifesteal. Instead, Mauga feels his passive overhealth by 100, same as the mid-season 9 change that got reverted a week later. It now ignites all enemies within Cardiac's 10.5 meter radius and line of sight. Whether it pierces through shields or not is something I've yet to decide. While the maximum overhealth amount is doubled during Cardiac, so up to 400 overhealth. Also, due to severe ammo nerfs, Mauga will reload 50% faster during cardiac. Furthermore, because of his survivability, the cardiac is now tied to his overhealth and not lifesteal, it no longer needs to be as bursty, so cardiac's duration will be increased to 4 seconds, the same duration as many other tank mitigation cooldowns like Fortify or Shout. His cooldown will still remain 12 seconds though. However, if this iteration of cardiac proves to be too strong, instead of nerfing the overhealth gain, I would nerf the damage reduction to compensate. For perks! I only decided to slightly change Kinetic Bandolier while completely replacing Combat Fuel, mostly because part of its functionality was already integrated into the base kit. For Kinetic Bandolier, it can now overfill up to 100 ammo. Yeah, that's it. I didn't completely remove it since ammo matters a lot more with this iteration of Mauga, and I feel like this perk giving over ammo is a no-brainer. And now for Combat Fuel, I removed it and it is now replaced with a perk I call Sprint Meter. Overrun now has a sprint meter, which is activated by holding secondary fire, or right click. While sprinting, Mauga moves 50% faster with 50% more steering, but no longer has any damage reduction. The max sprint duration is 1 second, so half of Overrun's max duration. The perk is supposed to have a resource meter showing how much sprint you have remaining, but I'm not a UI artist like Popcorp, so just use your imagination and pretend there is a resource meter to its right. The perk is intended to be used in longer range maps, like your Havanas and circuits, by allowing him to either better close the distance or to fully commit on a target, but it is at a slight cost, as to not make this perk a must pick. Well, this wraps up my Mauga rework idea. If an ability wasn't mentioned, it means it was untouched. But before I wrap up this video, I want to thank Lucigu, who revised my rework and helped me design the text walls you saw, and Popcorp for helping me with the thumbnail. I would recommend to check out Lucigu's Twitch and Popcorp's YouTube channel, both linked down in the description. Additionally, if you want to see more of me, I stream live on Twitch every Tuesday and most weekends. And if you're excited for the next episode, which will be a bit controversial, feel free to sub.